The doorbell didn't ring. It boomed like a battering ram slamming into the quiet of a Sunday morning. My coffee mug trembled on the kitchen counter. When I opened the door, the entire HOA board stood there in matching windbreakers and smug expressions, flanked by 2 security guards gripping clipboards. But before I could even ask, violation of what? A voice behind me, deep, calm, unmistakably lethal, cut through the tension. You'll be addressing me now. They froze. One of the guards actually dropped his pen. Because stepping forward from the hallway, still wearing his tactical gloves and aviators, was my son's full-time bodyguard, Grant. Former Special Forces. When I first moved into Sycamore Hollow, I thought I'd found heaven in a zip code. Quiet cul-de-sac, polite neighbors, enough space between homes that you couldn't hear every dog bark or toddler tantrum. After 32 years in federal procurement, 7 of them spent handling crisis contracts in war zones, I was ready for peace. My son Alex had just come to live with me, medically retired after what the Pentagon called a non-conventional injury incident. Titanium in his spine, scars he wouldn't talk about, and more nightmares than sleep. He never complained. I did, loudly, to any doctor or bureaucrat who dared dismiss his pain or delay his benefits. Eventually we found our rhythm. Therapy in the morning, chess in the afternoon, ribs on Sundays. I'd kill to keep that kind of life. So I fought for it. We hired Grant. On paper he was a recovery assistant. In reality he was a tank in slacks, ex-Delta, probably, polite to a fault, moved like smoke and fixed the water heater without blinking. He jogged perimeter checks like a ghost with a Glock. The HOA didn't like that. At first things were quiet, too quiet. A welcome packet arrived. Cookies, a newsletter full of clip-art smiles, a map of approved exterior colors, a band tree list, and a note reading "Together we maintain harmony." It felt more like a threat. I shrugged it off, until the letters began. Violation, grass height, an inch over regulation. My mower had broken. I'd planned to cut it the next morning. Then came the mailbox complaint. Matte black wasn't on the approved palette. I repainted it beige, cursing under my breath. But the 3rd letter made me stop laughing. Urgent removal of non-approved storm protection devices. They meant the reinforced shutters, military grade, FEMA approved and insurance praised, that had survived a Category 4 hurricane. Apparently they didn't fit the visual standards. I invited the HOA president, Brenda Halloway, Botox smiles, pearl earrings, and the emotional range of a spreadsheet, for a civil conversation. She arrived with 2 clipboard-toting flunkies, took a lap around the house and said, "Optics matter." I told her optics don't stop flying glass during a hurricane. She smiled and said, "Rules are rules." A week later, a $250 fine. I filed a formal appeal. They didn't respond. Instead, another violation, unauthorized cohabitation. I nearly dropped my coffee. An adult male of non-familial relation is residing in your home, it read. Grant. They were talking about Grant. I called the HOA office. Colleen, chirpy and smug, informed me that aides and unrelated guests had a 30-day limit. I explained that Grant was a licensed caregiver, legally exempt under both state housing law and the Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act. She hesitated, then said, "You'll need to present that in writing at the next board meeting or fines will continue." I hung up. No yelling. Just silence, the kind that comes before a lightning strike. That's when I knew this wasn't about lawns or shutters. It was about control. Someone saw a scarred son and a silent bodyguard and thought, easy target. They didn't know who I was. I'd spent my life auditing black budget projects and writing laws that made senators sweat. They didn't know what kind of man Grant was, or the kind of line you crossed when you threatened someone he protected. But I watched them cross it and I took notes. If they wanted a war over a mailbox, I'd show them what it meant to fight by the book. A book they didn't even know existed. The next day, I filed a formal disability accommodation request with documentation from Alex's doctor. certified mail, CC to every board member and the county zoning commissioner. No response. 2 days later, another note. Our trash bins had remained at the curb 17 minutes too long. $25 fine. I laughed, cold and toothy, and poured myself a bourbon. Then I called in a favor. I need every HOA record from the past 7 years, contracts, voting records, filings. Everything. My friend hesitated. You getting back in the game? No, I said. I'm just trying to mow my damn lawn. And that was the beginning. Not of the fight, that would come later. But of the moment I stopped playing nice. Because Brenda and her board had just launched a full-scale offensive against a man who built his career reading the fine print. And behind him stood a son with a soldier's silence, and a bodyguard with nothing left to lose. It started with a camera. A tiny black dome tucked beneath a street lamp. I noticed it when the sunlight caught the lens. Called the city. They had no record of it. I walked the block. Found another beneath the bulletin board. A third under the new HOA decorative archway. None pointed at the street. All aimed at my house. That afternoon the letters resumed. Trash bin hours, hose placement, suspicious activity during non-curfew hours, whatever that meant. One even cited visible firearm-like equipment. Foam rollers used in Alex's therapy. 2 HOA loyalists, Brenda's lapdogs, started showing up daily at 8 a.m., measuring our lawn with pink tape. The new favorite move was snapping time-stamped photos of our side yard and claiming the rehab gear violated visual harmony. So we documented everything. Cameras and shrubs. One disguised as a birdhouse. Grant ran encrypted feeds, stored locally in the cloud and offsite. Brenda escalated again, this time a formal noise disturbance complaint. And we hadn't even started making noise yet. It all began on a Tuesday morning during one of Alex's rehab sessions. He and Grant were in the side yard, quietly working through resistance exercises. No shouting, no music, just the sound of a 5-pound medicine ball thudding into the grass and Grant's low, calm voice guiding him. But according to Brenda, that qualified as a military-adjacent disturbance. Her words, not mine. I requested to address the citation at the next neighborhood board meeting. She denied the request. Closed session, she said, citing sensitive topics. So, I did what I do best. I followed the paper trail. In the HOA's public filings, buried in the expense column, I found a line item labeled, Contracted Compliance Services, $18,750. One name stood out, Holloway Civic Enforcement LLC. A quick search confirmed my suspicion. It was owned by Kyle Holloway, Brenda's husband. So the HOA's enforcers weren't just zealous volunteers and windbreakers. They were paid contractors under Brenda's control, issuing citations and legal-looking notices as a family business. I didn't react publicly. I let her think the game was still rigged in her favor, but in private I started moving my pieces. First, I met with a civil rights attorney, sharp mind, quiet presence. He studied the surveillance, the fabricated violations, the targeting. They're walking a legal tightrope, he said. And your documentation is a razor. His advice, patience and precision. The next week, we filed an anonymous tip with city code enforcement about the unpermitted surveillance cameras. 2 days later, they were pulled down by a flustered city maintenance crew, one of whom muttered that someone at City Hall was furious. Then we leaked a clip, just enough, of Brenda in her backyard telling a fellow board member, "We need to squeeze them harder. Make them uncomfortable. They'll crack." The clip, posted by a user named Quiet Neighbor Ray 4, spread quickly on the neighborhood forum. Comments exploded, "This is not okay. Who are they targeting? Are we next?" Brenda panicked, hand-delivering a letter claiming the footage was illegally obtained and threatening legal action. The irony? The conversation had occurred in full view of a public sidewalk and was captured by a camera mounted legally on my property. Legal, public, and time-stamped. Then came the IRS tip. just a request for a routine audit of Holloway Civic Enforcement LLC. We flagged inconsistencies in their 990 easy form. Total payroll listed as $620, yet Brenda had insisted her team were unpaid volunteers. We submitted it anonymously via VPN from a public library, using the alias Bartholomew Granger, Grant's idea because he has a weird sense of humor. Meanwhile, I began archiving every HOA communication, not just the ones sent to me but community-wide notices, newsletters, policy updates. I ran them through a stylometric analyzer I'd written years ago during my federal contracting days. It picks up unique language patterns and writing fingerprints. Unsurprisingly, it revealed that every notice, even those allegedly authored by the board, had Brenda's voice stamped all over them. It wasn't governance, it was dictatorship rubber-stamped by yes-men too scared to push back. One morning I found a chalk drawing in front of my driveway, not a crime scene outline, but a stick figure doing push-ups, labeled tactical in block letters. Next to it, an HOA notice citing, "No outdoor workouts before 9 a.m. I laughed, not because it was clever but because it was desperate. Brenda was unraveling, and in power games, desperation leads to mistakes. Later that week, I caught one of her board members, Chuck, a retired orthodontist with more opinions than spine, sneaking into our side yard to measure the distance from our deck to the neighbor's fence. I stepped outside with a camera and offered him coffee. He fled like I'd caught him stealing classified documents. A week later, we filed a restraining order citing surveillance, harassment, and retaliatory enforcement. It didn't stick, but it shook them. Now, every move they made had to be weighed against the possibility of a courtroom appearance. We weren't hiding anymore. We weren't begging for fairness or quoting statutes. We were laying legal traps, and Brenda stepped on every single one. At the next board meeting, she tried to push a new policy banning security contractors from residing in the neighborhood. Not targeting anyone specifically, she claimed, just protecting aesthetic values. That night, the proposed rule leaked to a local disability rights group. Within 48 hours, it was all over Twitter. Brenda was buried in messages accusing her of ableism, harassment, and discrimination. Someone spray-painted "Not all heroes are HOAs" across the neighborhood gazebo. The HOA tried to scrub it off, but the damage was done. Whispers started. Not just about us, about Brenda. About Kyle's enforcement company. About contracts and control. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors became momentum. And momentum? That becomes an avalanche. We didn't need to start the storm. We just kept building pressure. Leak by leak. Letter by letter. Every clipboard warrior in her army slowly bleeding legitimacy. Brenda thought she was playing a game of inches. She didn't realize we'd already stolen the entire field. And in the end, it was a simple coffee stain that gave it away, not on our paperwork but on theirs. I'd been digging through Sycamore County's land registry for over a week, long enough to grow familiar with the peculiar chaos of small-town bureaucracy, misfiled folders, crooked photocopies, and the occasional espresso stain left behind by a distracted clerk. But on page 63 of Archive File 42A, beneath 3 decades of easement requests and annexation forms, I found it. A yellowed sheet of paper stamped February 19, 1972, bearing the faded seal of the Office of County Land Management. In blunt, blocky type it read, "Special Use Exemption Covenant, Willow Tributary Agricultural Corridor, now known as Sycamore Hollow." My fingers trembled as I read it. The document was crystal clear in a way few legal texts ever are. Every parcel within the old Willow Tributary Zone was exempt, legally and irrevocably, from any future municipal, civic, or private governance imposing external residential control. No HOAs. No board. No rules about mailbox paint or grass height. My lot, parcel 1412C, was listed in ink older than Brenda herself. This wasn't a loophole. It was a fortress. Every fine, every warning, every violation, was legally null. I closed the folder and took a long breath. If I were another man, I might have stormed Brenda's office and slammed the document on her desk like a courtroom finale. But I'd learned patience. Brenda wasn't done climbing yet, and people like her only fall when they're high enough for the fall to matter. So I slipped the covenant into a weatherproof sleeve, locked it in my gun safe, and poured a whiskey. We'd play this out quietly. Then we'd drop the hammer. That hammer came faster than expected. Not a letter this time, a knock. Heavy, deliberate, official. I opened the door to find 3 men in black polos, slacks, and boots. Community Enforcement Division was stitched across their chests. One wore a body cam that was very clearly not recording, judging by the red light that wasn't blinking. They had clipboards, radios, and expressions that screamed mall cop playing SWAT. The tallest one stepped forward. "We're here to serve notice of immediate administrative eviction on behalf of the Sycamore Hollow Residential Oversight Board." I blinked. "Come again?" He recited a list of pseudo-legal jargon. Non-compliance, unauthorized guest residency, violation of Articles 12, 14, and 21, vacate within 72 hours or face removal and civil penalties. He extended a folder stuffed with fine print and threats. I didn't take it. Instead, I turned and called into the house. "Grant. We've got a situation." Grant stepped out like a specter. Joggers, t-shirt, but his presence snapped the air taut. The men flinched. He didn't blink, didn't swing his arms when he walked. He filled the space like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to take control. "Identification," he said flatly. The tall one hesitated. "We've given verbal notice that satisfies." "No, it doesn't," Grant cut in. "You're not officers. You're private contractors impersonating uniformed officials. That's a felony. Title 18, Section 912. You're 30 seconds from getting on a federal watch list you didn't know existed." He stepped forward, slow and surgical. "You've been recorded from 5 angles delivering false legal documents to a federally exempt property. You're on private land under false pretenses. Which means I can detain you. Or you can walk away and forget this address exists." The second man, smaller, sweatier, backed up fast. The leader glanced between Grant, his clipboard, and me. "You can't scare us. We're acting under board authority." "You mean Brenda's authority?" I asked. "Because Holloway Civic Enforcement doesn't appear in the state contractor registry. You're not bonded, you're not licensed, and unless you want to explain to the sheriff why you're wearing fake badges and threatening a disabled veteran, I suggest you start walking." Grant didn't smile much, but this time he did, just a flicker. Enough to confirm he wasn't bluffing. The third guy left. The tall one lingered, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Then he followed. I shut the door behind them. Not a slam, just a quiet, satisfying click. "That felt like a turning point," I said. Grant nodded. "They're getting reckless." "Good," I said. "We're almost there." What Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I'd already filed the 1972 covenant with the county clerk, the zoning board, and the Department of Housing Compliance. It was now under formal review as a historic exemption. That meant any attempt to enforce anything would be flagged. Once approved, the exemption would be permanently added to the zoning map, public, irrefutable, and binding. But I wasn't done. I sent everything to my lawyer, the covenant, every HOA notice, every shady interaction. 2 hours later he called. "You've got a case for punitive damages, Fair Housing Act violations, illegal surveillance, attempted fraudulent eviction. If this goes to court, we're looking at 6 figures." I told him I didn't want money. I wanted them gone. "Then we go slow," he said. "Let them file one more bluff, then we take it all down." That bluff arrived in the form of a cheery neighborhood newsletter. Sunset graphic. Quote about unity. But in bold, dead center. Reminder. All residents must comply with updated housing uniformity statutes. Forthcoming occupant status review scheduled for Q3. Non-compliant households may be subject to removal, penalties, or reassessment. This wasn't just about me anymore. Brenda was swinging wild. And that's when it all began to unravel. One of the enforcement goons, the sweaty one, leaked a screenshot of their internal training materials. It included phrases like target psychological soft spots, escalate discomfort, and pressure toward voluntary compliance. The forum exploded. Silent neighbors became outraged. Brenda tried damage control, claiming it was out of context. Then Chuck, the trembling coward, resigned from the board. His statement? I was told the covenant didn't matter. I trusted her. I shouldn't have. And then I dropped the bomb. I emailed the covenant to every single resident in Sycamore Hollow. I attached a plain language breakdown, no legal jargon, just the truth. This land is not subject to HOA governance. This neighborhood has been exempt for over 50 years. You've been lied to. I signed my name and included a scanned copy of the county's confirmation. The response? Like a brush fire. Emails. Calls. Outrage. Brenda called an emergency board meeting, but it was already over. Her army was disarmed. Her threats were neutralized. And the throne she sat on? Built on rules that no longer applied. All we had to do was knock. The evidence was sealed with a thoroughness that made bureaucrats sweat, but the air in the room carried the crackling heaviness of a rebellion just waiting to ignite. The emergency HOA meeting had been called by Brenda herself, probably hoping to spin the leaks, the outrage, and the unraveling into a story that would save her. But what she didn't realize, standing there in her blazer and pearls, was that she was already obsolete. A fossilized queen presiding over a crumbling regime. I took my seat near the front, folders neatly stacked on my lap, and waited. The murmur around me wasn't the polite hum of last year's barbecues. It was sharp, charged, laced with names whispered not in suspicion but in something resembling respect. Mine, Grant's, Alex's. When Brenda banged her little gavel and called the meeting to order, the ripple that moved through the crowd wasn't attention, it was tension. Good evening, she began, her voice polished too bright, trying to reclaim control. In light of recent misinformation. But I stood before she could continue. Point of order, I said, loud enough to halt her momentum. As a resident directly affected by board actions, I request to address the assembly. She opened her mouth to object, but something in the room, maybe the rows of phones held up ready to live stream, or the arms crossed in stone silence, made her hesitate. She nodded tightly. I stepped to the front, laid the folders on the podium, took a breath. For the past 8 months, I said, voice even and deliberate, this board, under the direction of Brenda Halloway, has engaged in targeted harassment, unlawful surveillance, fraudulent enforcement, and financial misconduct against the residents of Sycamore Hollow. Murmurs, gasps. I let them rise, then opened the first folder, the 1972 Land Covenant, now stamped and verified by the county recorder. This community, specifically the lots surrounding the Old Willow tributary, was legally exempted from future private governance. No HOA jurisdiction. No enforcement authority. Every notice, fine, and inspection issued by this board was illegal. I flipped the document to show the highlighted lots. You had no power here. Behind me, Brenda stiffened. One person clapped. Then stopped. I went on, sliding out the next folder. Screenshots of citation notices with timestamps matching footage from illegally installed cameras. Photos of unpermitted inspections, and finally payment ledgers showing Brenda's husband profiting directly through Halloway Civic Enforcement LLC. This isn't mismanagement, I said. It's racketeering. It's surveillance abuse. It's a civil rights violation against a disabled resident protected under the Fair Housing Amendments Act. I dropped the final sheet, a formal notice of litigation drafted by my attorney, onto the podium. This is happening. And Brenda Halloway will be held accountable both individually and as acting president of this HOA. What followed wasn't shocked silence. It was waiting silence, The moment before the dam breaks. Brenda tried, bless her desperate heart. She cleared her throat and leaned into the mic. "These are serious accusations," she said, her voice faltering under the weight of truth. "We must not jump to conclusions. We have the county's confirmation," came a voice from the crowd. Jensen, the quiet accountant, standing tall. "We have the payment records," said Mrs. Patel, holding up her phone. "We have the footage," Grant added from the back, calm and lethal as ever. Brenda's mask cracked. Her eyes darted to her board members, seeking allies, but found none. Chuck, poor twitchy Chuck, stood up, raised his hands like a man surrendering in war. "I resign," he said. Another followed. Then another. In less than a minute, Brenda was alone, sweating under fluorescent lights and cornered by truth. She tried, then swallowed. "I hereby resign as president of the Sycamore Hollow Homeowners Association." The applause was thunderous, not polite but triumphant. She grabbed her designer handbag like a life preserver and fled. No one stopped her. Someone even opened the door. In the stunned quiet that followed, we held a vote. Temporary leadership, they said. Someone nominated Grant. Another seconded. He tried to refuse, said he wasn't political. But Alex, his voice rarely heard beyond our porch, spoke. "You protected me when they wouldn't," he said simply. "You protected all of us." Grant accepted. Unanimously. No contest. Within a week, everything began to change. Every fine issued under Brenda's rule was refunded. Every lien canceled. Every camera ripped down and thrown away like the relics of a dictatorship. Holloway Civic Enforcement came under formal investigation. Our quiet IRS tip now turbocharged by formal complaints and evidence of misconduct. Meanwhile, my yard flourished, literally. I planted a row of hedges right where Brenda's cameras once perched. Tall, healthy, defiant. And at the center, I bolted a silver plaque into stone. It read, "Property protected by legacy and law." The irony wasn't lost on me. Brenda had sought control but ensured freedom. She tried to erase individuality and ended up creating warriors. Now, on warm evenings, I sit on the porch with Alex beside me, coffee in hand, flag fluttering gently above us. Grant leans against the rail, always scanning the horizon. Out of habit, not necessity. There are no threats now. No clipboards. No letters slipped under doors. Just crickets. When? The kind you don't find. The kind you win. We nod at neighbors as they pass, smiles no longer defensive but genuine. Because it wasn't just my lawn that grew back. It was the whole neighborhood. Reclaimed. Restored. Rooted. Strong. Stronger than they ever imagined we could be.